Hello, everyone. This is Dr. B again. As I promised you, I'm coming back for chapter 2. First, let me introduce myself formally. I'm Dr. Madeline Boskowitz. I'm a retired psychologist who writes books for teens and young adults. My first book was this one, I Want to Be Me, but I Don't Know Who I Am. It's a guidebook for teens and young adults. The second book is the workbook for this first one, and it addresses preteens, teens, and young adults. And in a few minutes, you will understand why I've included preteens in the workbook, even though the guidebook does not address preteens per se. So today we're going to get on to chapter 2. And I'm going to cover some of the exercises in the workbook because they help you understand and visualize to see what it means to be accomplishing the things that are mentioned and explained in the guidebook. So I want to talk briefly about chapter 2. Chapter 2 is actually what happens from birth or even conception. You all know that that's what that means. And until you enter the preteen years. The reason for this is that you're not born at 13 years of age. You've had already 13 years of life and then sometimes most of an additional 9 months of what we call gestation while you were growing in your birth mother's womb. So, and this is important because whatever your mother was living at the time has affected you. You were part of her body, even though you were floating with your own blood system. Some of you may know that, but still, if she was happy, you knew that. If she was afraid, if she was anxious, if she was depressed, if she was drinking alcohol or smoking drugs, all of this would have affected you. So these things are important to know because they impact you. So this is why I'm also covering the earlier period before you reach adolescence. Adolescence are the teen years. So let's just take a peek at the chapter 2. I'm going to share the screen with you and see if I can find it. Okay, here it is. So I'm sharing the screen and you have a picture of a boy that's also on the cover. If you remember him, he's actually the first guy here on the cover. So every chapter has a different person. You may have noticed that the first chapter is my picture. Even though I'm not on the cover, I'm on the back cover. As a matter of fact, here I am on the back cover as the author. So as I wrote here, it's actually about the first 12 years of your life. So just about till you reach the beginning of your teen years, and it includes the preteen years. So let me explain to you why. I already gave you some examples. So part of the first thing to ask you about physical development. I don't ask you about your mother's pregnancy, but I do ask whether you were born early, whether you were premature, whether anything was wrong, and if there were actually any problems with your mother's pregnancy, which is important for you to know. And even if you're living with a guardian or a foster parent or even an adoptive parent, it's quite possible that they know this and can answer your questions, which you may want to ask them. So, and it is important to know if you were premature or not. Were you hospitalized? Sometimes babies are born with problems and they have to be hospitalized, or if they're premature, they remain in the hospital until they reach a normal birth weight and can function outside. So I do look at that quickly. You can always add information that you want and details. This is, as you know, this is for you and no one else. So, or you may want to share it, of course, but it's your work in progress. So then I talk about what we call the milestones of development that babies go through, and most babies go through. Sometimes babies have a handicap of some sort, and it is, of course, very important to mention that here because it's part of who you are. It's part of the way you manage your life. So all these things are very important. If you'll remember, I talked about awareness, and this is why it's good to know. The more you know about yourself, the better you can take charge of yourself, which is the work of the teen years. But we will talk about that, how we begin in this chapter. So it is very important. Besides, I think most people are very curious about their life and what they were like when they were little. And a lot of times parents will tell you, what you were like. They will tell you little stories about something you said or you did. And all these are kind of pleasant and also useful. And again, if you're not being brought up by your parents, it's more difficult. But maybe you have some memories, I hope. And maybe if you have access to your parents, you can find out information. But it can be very challenging. And I hope that this is something that you can, research, however difficult it may be. And it may take time. There are things you may not find out till you're older, and that's okay too. But again, the more you know, the better. So then we move on to the elementary school years, and many of you do not like reading or math or writing, but these skills are absolutely essential. They are very important to get around in the world and to have any kind of success. So it is very important to master these things. And I think most children do master it, sometimes very early, sometimes at a regular age, per the grade you're in, and sometimes it takes longer, particularly if you have some kind of handicap, which I talk about later in the book, but this is often a time when handicaps are discovered, if you're dyslexic or if you have troubles concentrating because of attention deficit. All these are important to know, and they can be countered. The earlier you find them, the easier it is to correct them or find ways to get around them if they cannot be corrected. So I'm sure you have had time to look at this. I'm going to go on. This is actually one of the most important parts and the one that takes most of this chapter, and which I take right into chapter 3. Some of the issues that I brought up in chapter 2 in the guidebook are also handled in chapter 3, but I think you'll be able to adapt to that very quickly. So, when you are little, there are many, many things to learn. Of course, there are the physical things to learn, as we just looked at, walking, talking, going to the toilet, learning to run, skip, jump, all kinds of physical skills. Excuse me, this thing fell down. That's why. I took care of that. So physical things that have to be learned. And I also mentioned in the guidebook that, kids want to learn all these things. They may have trouble with math and writing, but they want to learn the skills because that's what everybody does. We are a species where people copy on each other. If your parents are reading things, you want to be able to read. If they are doing math and counting and shopping, and we don't really do much math in the store anymore. We used to count our change, make sure that it was right. But nobody has change anymore. We just have credit cards for many of us. But it's important to learn to count and to be able to count change, even if you have a credit card. You never know when you're going to need it. So, but in terms of what I call social development or emotional development, how do you behave? Did you learn to obey your parents or caregivers? Did you throw temper tantrums? At what age did you stop? Maybe you haven't stopped. Sometimes it happens. I see young teens who are still throwing temper tantrums, so I help them learn to stop that and to speak up and negotiate what they want rather than throw a tantrum. Did you learn to talk to your parents about what you needed rather than throw a temper tantrum? So were you allowed to speak up for yourself? No, maybe not. Some homes you are and some homes you're not. How did it feel, whichever way? And how did you learn to behave with peers, with the other children that you were with? Did you know how to take turns? You know how to play fair and be nice about it when you win or lose? Do you know how to not cheat? Do you engage in cheating? What does that mean to you? So you can see the questions here. And then I go on to school things as well. But sometimes you have projects or a game that you're playing with friends. Do you stick to it or do you quit in the middle if you're frustrated or if you're bored? Do you know how to finish what you start if you commit to do something? So, and then at school, do you behave in such a way that you do well in school? Do you know how to pay attention? Do you know how to avoid getting in trouble by being out of your seat or talking or teasing someone? Do you know how to be honest and respect other kids' stuff? Do you know how to accept consequences for when you misbehave? Do you know how to apologize to others? So in this chapter, I also go in more depth about, let me just quickly look at this again. Oh, this one, behavior with friends, making good friends. A lot of times when I saw children in my office, of course, I see children who are having problems, not the children who are doing well, but they were having a hard time making good friends and being good to their friends, as well as expecting their friends to be good to them. Some children were shy, some were very aggressive, some were always angry, some just didn't know how to do what was needed to have some good friends and feel good about themselves. So this part, this exercise 4, is about how you behave with your friends. Do you allow them to put pressure on you? Do you allow them to, I actually start with how you behave with them. Are you a good friend? Do you have their back? Do you protect them if they need it? Can they count on you? Do you respect them? Do you respect their property? Do you avoid putting pressure on your friends to do your bidding? That's not a thing that's positive. So do you trick them into doing what you want them to do? That's not very good either. And how do you handle disagreements? Do you talk about things? Do you just get mad and drop a friend? How do you make up after a fight? Do you make up after a fight? Do you betray friends by talking trash about them if you're mad at them? All these things are very important to look at. And so they're included in this chapter. And then I turn the thing the other way. Friends must treat you well. and you must demand that of them and demand respect. And this is how you choose friends. Those who don't treat you well and who do not kind of come around to treating you well are not your friends. It's very important to recognize who's your friend and who's not. This is absolutely, and this is a good time in your life before you reach the teen years to learn how to, what we call judge people, how to know, to get street smart, how to know when you're being treated well and not, and how to hold your ground. And you will see that in the rest of the book many, many times. So in chapter 2 in the guidebook, I'm going to stop sharing here. In the guidebook, I talk about organizing yourself and putting your things in order so as to be more efficient. I'm thinking here about homework or about household chores, things that you need to get done. Now in the workbook, I put that in chapter 3, not in chapter 2. So you will encounter it when we go to the next chapter. I felt that this was a lot to think about your friendships and how you treat others and how they treat you. This was certainly enough for chapter 2. This is very important. And in that chapter at the end, you get to kind of look carefully at 3 of your friendships that you choose, of course. And what are they like? What are their good points? What are their bad points? And this is to, again, help you think about things, help you become more aware of how you live your life. And because the work of the teen years is to learn how to live your life and to be aware of the choices you make, as you kind of glimpsed in chapter 1. I want to mention that this book, the workbook, is on sale at 15% off until the end of this month. After this month, at the end of this month, in 12 or 13 days, when we finish, it will go back to its regular price. So if you're thinking about getting the workbook, this is a good time to get it before the price goes up. So I look forward to talking with you again very soon. Take care. Bye.